So this is sort of the second weekend after the bread weekend last weekend, where I needed to have a healing moment after I'd made those croissants. And I did use an adjective in my head for those croissants, which wasn't very nice. But if I'm really looking at what the definition used or the experience I was supposed to get out of making croissants was out of my King Arthur flour cookbook that I've been making this out of, and it's the Baker's Companion. The description under classic puff pastry, a primer, is anyone who can fold a letter in thirds and hold a rolling pin can make puff pastry. We think you'll be surprised at how satisfying it is to create more layers and a more ethereal product with every fold. Well, I was surprised at the outcome, but ethereal would not be the word I'd use. I did look up ethereal just to make sure I knew what ethereal meant, but I thought, well, maybe they're using it in a different way. And it's extremely delicate and light in a way that seems too perfect for this world. I want to experience that when I'm making croissants, and that is not the experience I had. So today I thought I'd sort of prop myself up a little bit, and instead of body armor or body apron, I'm going to wear body armor with my apron, my trusty apron, which I always wear. I also thought it might be a great idea to wear my concert t-shirt from Bauhaus's tour, their 40th anniversary with Peter Murphy and David J. That's always, Peter Murphy's the godfather of goth. How can you not be inspired by that if you're going to cook these or bake these croissants? Also, I have a great story to tell you about Peter Murphy. That was one of the most endearing moments I actually witnessed for my husband. We met Peter Murphy backstage after seeing him at a concert at St. Andrews in Detroit. And I have to tell you kind of a funny story of what you talk about now from music you listened to or would have listened to originally when you were 18 and now you're in your 50s and 60s. The conversation you have the most of is custom earplugs, which is just a funny thing to me. I certainly was not worrying about that when I was listening to the music the first time in the 80s. Anyway, so we're at this concert and we get to meet Peter Murphy afterward. And my husband, a couple of years ago when we were in London, made a pilgrimage to Northampton, England, where his ancestors are from. On that same day that he was doing sort of ancestry trail, I was doing vacation chores in London, and I know that seems rather odd, but we buy a lot of books when we travel, and they're hard to carry back. They're pretty heavy, and short of buying an additional suitcase, I tend to check out where the most local or closest to us FedEx or UPS is, and always send back a lot of books to our home so we don't have to carry them back home in our suitcases. So we were in the UK, Chris was doing his ancestry type of thing, and we knew that Peter Murphy is originally from, he does not live there now, but he is from Northampton, England. And during the meet and greet afterward, Chris particularly did not want me to be in the photo with him. He wanted his own moment with Peter Murphy and David J. So he did have that. So they went and talked, and Peter Murphy was thrilled that his ancestors were from there. So it just gave him an instant connection. And the smile on my husband's face is one of the most endearing and most genuine and big smiles I have ever seen him have. He didn't have a smile like that with me when we got married 20 years ago. So it was a very cool, endearing, sweet moment with the godfather of goth. So now we're going to go ahead and start these croissants. So now we begin. We're going to start with making the dough. So what we do first is we put 3.5 cups of unbleached all-purpose flour into our mixing bowl with a good old KitchenAid mixing bowl. And then we also add 4 tablespoons of butter, chilled butter, that we add to this mix, and then we combine it in the mixer. So right now we're just going to put in, this is not that complicated yet. So this is the easy part so far. Now I have to say what's kind of funny that I was thinking about, and actually someone mentioned this when I told them about my croissant experience, was that they reminded me of that movie called It's Complicated. Do you remember when Meryl Streep, Alec Baldwin, and Steve Martin, and I think she was a baker, and they went back to her place, maybe after a date or something like that, and she whipped up croissants in maybe a half an hour. And I realized that a half an hour is clearly movie time, not real life time, because unless you're doing croissants out of a package, like Pillsbury rolled up croissants, it is way longer than a half an hour. Try 2 days. So perhaps she had them ready to dazzle everybody, just, you know, with ready to go in the background and ready to go. But I can tell you, I thought, and I know it's movie time, but you honestly do kind of think that it's an easy process, that you something maybe you could whip up at a late night date, but it really isn't. So now I'm gonna cut it up, the butter, so it's not just a half stick. It is a half stick, or 4 tablespoons of butter that I'm gonna go ahead and put into my baking bowl here. I'm gonna put on my KitchenAid. So you're not gonna have the benefit of seeing that part, but I think you get the idea. It's just my half stick of butter and my 3.5 cups of flour, and I'm gonna go ahead and mix that up. And it basically, oh, maybe not. I might have to use my pastry whisk a little bit, but kind of looks like cornmeal, and that's what you really want. That's what you talk about. So like a light little cornmeal. I'm gonna add salt to the water and stir well, and then add the flour. And the salt, we're doing 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And I think one thing that I didn't mention before when I was using my measuring cups, I mean, you could certainly hear them in the other bread video, but I have a set given to me by my mother-in-law that has more than just the 4 standard measuring spoons. I have not only the tablespoon, but I have a half tablespoon. So this was a real baking game changer for me when I got all of these great sizes. So I use them all. So I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt to my water. Cold water, just to make sure I confirm that. So it's 1.25 cups cold water. I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons of salt to my cold water. And then it talks about stirring that well. So I'm going to go ahead and stir that well with just a wooden spoon. Sometimes I use a little mini whisk to stir it around to dissolve the water. But at the moment, I'm just going to use a wooden spoon. And then I'm going to go ahead, and it says to add to the flour, which I'm going to do. And it also talks about using then either a fork to mix it around or a pastry whisk. Now, I actually bought this pastry whisk many years ago, and I actually only bought it before I knew what it was, just because it was a cool kitchen gadget, but I use it all of the time. So I would say, as a used utensil in my kitchen, this pastry whisk is a must-have. So I use this all the time. So we're going to go ahead and add this water to the dough. And it talks about, you know, move it gently with my whisk, my dough whisk, until you have a rough dough that pulls away from the sides of the bowl. Okay, so it's pulling away, but and I did have that lovely sort of cornmeal-like flour. But it also says, you're going on this journey with me, because after 2 weekends ago, I got to really figure this thing out. And it does say if you need to add more water, go ahead, but only a tablespoon at a time to make sure that the dough holds together. So I'm going to go ahead and use my same container that I had the other water in and put a little more water in it so I can access it. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a tablespoon of water to start, because I really feel like I need it for my dough. So we're going to go ahead and put a tablespoon in, as I said, at a time, and keep working the dough around so it pulls away from the side, because the end goal is to get it to be, you know, loose enough that you can roll it out, but that it still holds together, so it'll I can bring it out a little more shaped. And we can get all of the dough parts. So I think I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon of water. I mean, don't be afraid of this. I mean, I had said that, you know, you need to be a little more accurate in, well, actually a lot more accurate in baking with your measurements. But for this particular part, the end goal is really to make sure it holds together and you can get it out of the bowl. So that's the most important thing. So, you know, we're using our dough whisk, our pastry whisk. I guess I might have called it a pastry whisk, but, you know, I'm a home baker. So anyway, the dough whisk, either way, again, my most favorite gadget in the entire kitchen. Okay, I think that's really in a good place that we can bring it out. And so it talks about, you know, we want to make sure we put it on a lightly floured surface. So that we certainly know how to do. That's easy. That's the easy part yet. We're still at all the easy stuff. We aren't to the hard stuff yet. Oh, there goes my rolling pin. We aren't to the hard stuff yet. This is still the easy stuff. Knead until it's smooth and a bit springy. Not stringy, springy. I just want to make sure you heard that correctly, okay? So I'm going to lightly put flour on my work surface here. And I do have my middle island here that's mobile. Is a great work surface. I can move around it. I can move it easily. It's great for cooking and baking. And then look at this guy right here. Look at how, again, it doesn't smell quite like the bread dough, but still, you know, it has that, I guess it's bread smell, rather than I'd say a yeasty smell. What is it? That's that bread smell. As I said, it does not have yeast in it. So we're going to knead it for 2 to 3 minutes. And then, this is an interesting thing. We are going to, after we knead it for 2 to 3 minutes, we are then going to put it either in plastic wrap, and it has to be in a square when we're done, plastic wrap and or a plastic baggie. And then we put it in the refrigerator for at least 30 minutes. So this is our first step where we get started with the croissants. So we knead it, we work it around, we fold it, and, you know, keep your hands floured. Certainly keep your surface floured and work it for 2 to 3 minutes. And again, you get that great, you know, I mentioned about this is the time where it brings for some time of reflection, actually, I think. And when you're kneading bread, you almost have this moments of free association. So your mind goes back to, I don't know, it just travels over time and space to different thoughts of childhood, of experiences that we've had. And one of the things I keep thinking about is I wish I had, so one thing in our family that we don't seem to know where it is, my mother used to make these amazing wheat rolls. And I have a lot of recipes from my mother, and a lot of them are in her handwriting, which is fantastic. And I polled the cousins, and nobody seems to have and polled my brother, but nobody seems to have the recipe for my mother's wheat rolls that she used to make. And man, now maybe they aren't as good today, I don't know, but I have to tell you, as soon as flour meets basically anything, I think about those wheat rolls and think, oh, what I wouldn't give to have that recipe right now. But that is not to be. I do not have that recipe, nor does anyone else. So I think that recipe goes with my mother, that went with my mother to her grave. So I think just the memory to me, maybe it's enough to have the memory of the smell and the taste. And she used to make the most wonderful soups. And for my 30th birthday party, she had like this great, she had a bunch of friends and family over, and she made like 3 different soups, and you can bet that she had those wheat rolls. So that's just a great. And for my 30th party, it was really fun because we had a couple of people come prepared with 3 stories that were really impactful in their lives. And so it was really fun to see what people decided to read. We didn't really give them any guidance what story to read, but it was a very memorable 30th party. It was great. So, okay, that's been about 2 to 3 minutes, and we have kneaded the dough. And okay, pat it into a square, which is kind of not that easy to do. You're so used to making it round. So we're gonna see how this square business goes here. I'm definitely it's easier to do dough, frankly, as rounds. And the butter, once we make our butter square, because you know what's coming, right? We have to make this into a square after it sits for 30 minutes, but you make a butter square that you put on a diagonal in this dough. And that's when you do your envelope folding. So, I mean, these are still easy things yet. It's when you start getting a little bit further afield. So we're gonna try to, shape this into a square. I'm going to, I think last time I made these, I actually put them in saran wrap or, plastic wrap. I'm gonna try the baggie today and see how that goes. Because, I'm looking for any little tricks up my sleeve. I have watched some tutorials on croissants, but, I thought I'd follow them fairly closely, but boy, I tell you, still not quite there. Well, this is kind of embarrassing and kind of funny, but I actually started this process, and you've now seen all that I've done. It's pretty much just got the dough in the refrigerator. And this is kind of a little bit of a snafu with home bakers. I didn't look and see how much butter I had in my refrigerator this morning. And I always have a lot of butter on hand. But most of it that I needed for today was in the freezer. So it needs to be cold when you work it and make your square, but not frozen. So we've had a bit of a snafu, and we're just waiting. I've been reading and doing household chores in the meantime, because this is kind of what you do. It's a Saturday. You can hear my washer and dryer going in the background, so I've actually got most of my washing and drying done, but I'm really it's taken even longer today than I had planned. So I believe after this weekend, I am good with croissants. So anyway, we're waiting for the butter to thaw, and then we will get back at it. So we will see how it goes. It might be nighttime by the time I get through the first day. I'm not really sure, because we still have not just this envelope folding, but we have 3 rounds of 30-minute long rolling and lamination periods yet today. That's not even baking or one last time. It's just the lamination part. We haven't even gotten to that point yet. So, word to the wise, make sure your butter is ready to go in the refrigerator and not in the freezer when you start this process. So, I've had a lot of time, so I've done, rather than you watching me put the flour in the measuring cup, I've gone ahead and pre-done that. So 1/2 cup of flour, though, is something that the recipe does recommend you put with the butter. So this is the butter part. My dough that I did earlier is still in the refrigerator waiting to be the carrier for this lovely butter. So 1/2 cup of flour in with the butter layer. So that is so the butter doesn't melt out around the edges. So we're going to do that in a mixing bowl again. So 1/2 cup of flour this time. Last time the butter was the small amount for the dough. For the butter layer, the flour is the smaller amount. So for the butter layer, we are going to put in, because we're still going to do this in a mixing bowl, back to my KitchenAid mixer, you put in 3.5 sticks of butter. So I should say too that all of the butter I've been using has been salted. Usually recipes will say unsalted if they're very specific about the butter, and unless they're specific about the butter that they want me to use, I go ahead and use the salted. So I have found that recipes tend to be very specific, and if they want you to use unsalted butter. I thought I would spare you the act of the butter actually in my KitchenAid mixer on the side here. So really it's just that flour and the butter, and that's all we have to do for this part of it.
for this middle butter layer that starts this wonderful lamination that we're going to have. So I'm taking this butter out of my bowl, and this is just the butter and flour, that's all it is. It's a measuring tool. You don't mind getting, and I'm going to use the term because exactly what happened, you don't want all of your parts becoming gunked up with butter, which mine have now. This used to be sort of my quick throw in my purse home projects tape measure. It is now my baking tape measure because it is gunked up with butter and all sorts of crevices. So we're kind of committed now to this being the baking measuring tool. And for this butter part, we want to shape it into, and I'm going to put a little flour on my hands because, you know, butter's sticky. So we want to shape this butter into an 8-inch by 8-inch square. It has to fit within the dough that we're going to put it in, and that's going to be a 12-inch by 12-inch square. So right now I've got my butter on a lightly floured surface, not my actual hard butcher block surface, but on a lightly floured piece of wax paper. You can use handy or plastic wrap as well, but I'm using waxed paper, and then I'll probably just, and it's supposed to go in the refrigerator for 30 minutes on a flat surface. Now I'm about 2 inches short, so I'm gonna pat it out a little bit more with that. So 8-inch square is what we want, and then I'm going to cover it just with the, with the wax paper. So it's been over 30 minutes because we've had to wait for the butter, that whole butter fiasco thing. And this is again the joys of being a home baker, but these are things that you learn what they're really good for you. So it's a good, these are good skills that you discover that you have that you didn't know you had. You're learning things, right? So what we're going to do right now, and this will make your dough a 12-inch square. So I'm just going to roll this out on a gently floured surface until it's 12 by 12 inches. I've got my ruler because I have to sit the butter right diagonal to the dough, which is, I think I mentioned 8 by 8 inches. So everything's a square, okay, or as square as you can make it. So we've got pretty much a 12 by 12 shape, a square. So we're going to go ahead and get our 8 by 8 inch butter out of the refrigerator that was sitting for 30 minutes. I feel like it's sort of the freeze-thaw, kind of like the weather we've been having. I feel like that's the kind of day I was having with our butter. So right now, I've got the 8 by 8 inch really diagonal then to the other square. So I don't know if you can see this. I'm just going to pick this up a minute. This is going to be easy. But you get the idea. It's a diagonal. Okay. So now what we do is we bring our folds together. Oops, I forgot that I had my little water in the way. I'm using a great Russell Wright little bowl. It says when I start pinching this little, making it sort of like an envelope, that you should wet your hands, your fingers a little bit. So I have to tell you something very kind of cool. If you like artists' house tours where they lived and worked, this one is a great one to check out in upstate New York. It's called Manitoga, and the designer, mid-century modern designer, Russell Wright, that was his home and studio. So I love to go to people's artist studios or designer studios that are actually where they lived. It's just such a great, especially if the furniture is original and the art's original and the landscape is very resonant for Russell Wright. There was a lot, he just really worked on the landscape, and it's just fascinating house tour. So if you do get a chance and you're ever in upstate New York, check out Manitoga, which is Russell Wright's home and was his home and studio. So check that out. It's a great home and studio. You will not be disappointed. Okay, so what you're going to do then is you start folding up the flaps, okay? You take the corners and fold them over. So I'm going to use my fingers a little bit because I want to pinch them over and make sure I seal. It's kind of like a little envelope, okay? So I want to seal all the ends together, and so I bring up all 4 corners, okay? And I bring them together, so I'm sealing my seams, okay? I bring up the last flap, okay, and make sure I've got, you know, something that looks like, well, sort of looks like an envelope. And you probably can't see this very well. I'm sort of describing it. I realized when I had the camera was up too far this morning and I just didn't, it was too distracting. The background was too distracting. But at the end of the day, you have like a little envelope. You bring up all 4 flaps, you pinch it together, okay, and you have like this envelope. It's not neat and it's not pretty, I realize that, but it was better when I actually did it 2 weeks ago. Maybe because it's the first time and I was paying more attention, so I have to start with this, is we're going to actually roll it over. So the seams are on the other side now. So the seams are tabled down, okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to roll this out into a 10-inch by 20-inch rectangle. And that's what's going to start our full lamination process, where we put it in the refrigerator multiple times and we sort of do the same process 3 different times. I want to make sure that it's 10 by 20 inches, and I believe I said that the barrel of your normal rolling pin is 10 inches. So this really helps you on the width, and then basically you just double that for the length. So I'm going to go ahead and set my gunked up tape measure here to 10 inches now to start. So I think I'm going to go ahead and get my 10 inches kind of started. And you do need some decent, you know, last weekend I said that I probably, you know, I have the body of a reader and a baker, not someone who's probably uses my upper body strength. I don't really work on that very much, but I realize probably doing laminated dough you should, because it takes a lot of work to knead out thicker dough, and then when you have a butter pat inside, so you know it takes some doing. But anyway, okay, so I've got it actually a pretty nice 10-inch width right now, and I'm constantly checking it. So now I'm going to go ahead and start my length of it that I need. Now that I have my width pretty much solid, I'm going to go ahead and work on my length. So we're really trying to get it to, you know, that's kind of fun. The other rolling pin, although fantastic, does not have any sound. So that's kind of a fun, you know, it's nice to have a little more audio to what we're doing besides just me talking. Okay, so we are right now 3 inches shy over 20 inches. So we're going to keep rolling it out. Now I've rolled it up too far. Okay, we're going to tuck it back in a little bit. Okay, so now we're at the 20 inches. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the dough, right now, our dough, and prepare it for the first folding and lamination. So I'm going to move my rolling pin out of the way so you can see this. We're going to go ahead and fold the first turn over on itself. Okay? I'm going to take my tape measure out of the way too, and you probably can't even, you know, see this, but this is what you do. You pretty much roll, you know, you have basically, you take the dough, your 10 by 20 inch dough, and you make it basically, you have 3 ends, so you have an even shape by the time you're done. So you basically divide your 10 by 20 inch dough into thirds, so you have this lovely rectangle at the end that it's about, you know, it's 10 inches wide, and it's probably 6 and 3/4 long at this point, because you've really tripled over your dough. So again, this is kind of what your dough should look like, okay? And you can see from the ends kind of how, I'll move my tape measure out of the way, see what's happening. And this is how we're going to start our really phases of lamination, that we're going to put in the refrigerator, we roll it out, we keep reshaping it, keeping it to this 10 by 20 inch shape. We will do that for the next 3 rounds of lamination. So it's still this at the end, but when we roll it out, we're constantly going back to that size. Classic puff pastry takes 6 times. Actually, I'm just going to read this out loud so I don't screw it up for you. It basically gets 6 turns before being formed into finished shapes and should rest chilled for at least 30 minutes between every 2 turns. So one of the things we also have to do is use a pastry brush to get rid of some of the excess flour. So that's kind of what I do as well. There's a lot of flour that gets on the floor from this. So I have definitely some flour cleanup chores when I'm done. And you have to be careful walking through the kitchen that you don't have slippery slippers on, I should say, because you're at home, or socks. Sometimes it gets slippery with the socks. So we make a note of how many times we've folded it and how many times we've turned it and folded it. So we have to make sure we do that because I have to make sure I get my 6 turns in. So again, it looks like a book ready to be opened. The corners are lined up together, and then we're going to complete how many folds we've this time and put the dough back in the refrigerator. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and put it in and fold it 2 more times. We're going to go ahead and actually do one. So once we have this book form, we're going to do for the first time, because it has to really go 3 different times for this folding and lamination. So I'm going to go ahead and do a round right now, 10 inches, but use your rolling pin as your guide, and I'm going to roll this back out to another, really roll it out to 10 by 20 inches. So that's what we're going to do. Okay. Because the length is what I'm going for right now. These nice layers are what's going to give us our beautiful layering once we bake them. So that's really important to get. These laminations are really preparing us for the beauty of what happens when you bake croissants. Our 20 inches. I'm going to shape it a little bit more for my 10 inches. I tend to get kind of lopped over here. But we still want to turn it, on itself the same way. You would do the 3, you turn it into itself. Okay, so we'll do that again. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and put it in the refrigerator. Okay, so we're going to cover it, and I'm going to use, I think, plastic wrap to go every 30 minutes. So before we do the final round, we'll actually bake them tomorrow. This has to go 2 more times. Okay, I don't know if this ever happens to you with plastic wrap, but geez, so Pete's. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and wrap that. Well, kind of wrap it. Might take 2 times here with this plastic wrap. I'm going to go ahead and wrap that. Okay, wrap that a couple of times, and then, as I said, this will be I think I have to get some more plastic wrap. We're going to go ahead and put it in the refrigerator for 30 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and do our second roll. I'm taking my laminated dough out of the refrigerator, and this is just round, basically 2 of the process. So you basically repeat the fold and roll process. I'm almost close to the 20 inches. Okay. Okay, let's see where we're at. Oh, this is kind of funny. Now I'm too long. Okay. We'll pick that up the next time, but I'm going to fold it on itself again. Kind of brush off some of this flour. We don't need that much flour in the folds. It's the butter in the folds that really makes the big difference. So I'm going to turn it on itself, okay? Like we talked about, I'm going to brush the flour off. And I still need flour on my work surface for rolling, okay? But now we're going to turn it the opposite way. Remember, this is the second round. We've done our folds. And now I'm going to roll it out again. The dimension is the same each time you fold and roll. 10 inches wide, 20 inches long, fold in 3s, and then turn and roll out again. So we're rolling it out again. Remember, 10 inches wide, 20 inches deep. Again, upper body strength is really good. I kind of had to laugh when I started out talking about Peter Murphy. The other thing that besides the, earplugs, which are kind of funny, is, when I was in high school and college and would go to concerts, I didn't usually, I could stand for a lot longer period of time. I never even thought about it, So I find now that I have to, when I go to a concert and if I don't get a seat or if I have to stand, and we stood, because we were right in the front row for Peter Murphy, right at the stage, I can't stand for 6 hours anymore and not take a leave when I get back to the hotel room. So this is the thing that has changed as well. I cannot stand, and I don't wear fancy shoes. I'm talking, a lot of times I wear my Converse tennis shoes, and those they don't have a lot of support in them, but you cannot stand for 6 to 8 hours anymore and not feel pain in every part of your body. So yes, Aleve or some type of anti-inflammatory is your best friend after standing at a concert. So this is what changes, not just earplugs, fancy earplugs, but your ability to stand for long periods of time and not feel the effects. It just is not done. So I'm constantly using, I would really recommend a plastic ruler as opposed to a tape measure, but I didn't actually have a plastic ruler, and I didn't feel like that was the most important thing I should buy right now during this time. I thought that maybe, groceries and things like that were probably the most important thing, and I didn't consider, I just didn't think about it. So I'm going to have to get a new tape measure. I guess I really don't need a new plastic ruler. I've already, as I said, gunked up my tape measure. I probably just need a new tape measure. Now that butter is in every crevice of this tape measure. I'm probably going to have to use Aleve after this as well, but make sure I'm close to maintaining my 10. Okay, and then 1 more inch, and I've got my 20 inches. And remember, we have to do this for the third time. So this is round 2. We have our magic 20. Gosh, let's hope so. Okay, again, I've extended it by just a hair. Okay, well, we're going to kind of shore up the rectangle. Fold it on itself again in the thirds, like. So here we are again. This is the lamination. We're going to dust off the excess flour. The flour is really to help us so we don't stick to the surface. And my other wrapping, it doesn't seem to have any stick left to it because it was sort of under the roll. So we're going to try this again. Oops, with a new batch of cling wrap, or plastic wrap, whatever you call it. I think you get the idea. So we are going to put this in the refrigerator again, 30 minutes, just like the last time, no changes. And when this comes out of the refrigerator, we're going to repeat the process that we just went through. So I decided for the last third lamination round, I probably should face the camera so you can actually see what I'm working with. So I'm going to turn, actually I'm supposed to turn it over. So the seam is on the opposite side. Okay. So we're going to do our other, 20 inch by 10 inch dimension that we talked about. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it a little my way so I can get kind of a long end and start rolling it out lengthwise here. So you can see the fold and what I'm talking about. So right about 20 inches there, you can see that. I'm using my tape measure here. 20 inches. And now we want to get to the 10, which is the width part of it. So we're a little shy on that. Let me see if I can move my tape measure now. Okay, probably right now about 4 more inches to go. 3 sort of times the charm are really the last time we will be doing this lamination process. So this is what's really creating those nice, beautiful layers that we want. Well, at least that is what we want. It's not what I got when I tried, making croissants for the first time a couple of weekends ago. I did not definitely experience that. So again, you kind of fold it over, brush off the flour, excess flour, fold it over again, brush off the excess flour, and make sure that the folded part when you roll it out is turn in the opposite direction. Again, this beautiful, nice rectangle is what we really want. So we're gonna go ahead and start folding it out again. Okay, this one, because it's sort of our final one, is trickier. It's a hard one to roll out, but move this down a little bit. See where we're at, and you can see as I do it more and more that it gets harder and harder to roll it out. Yep, it is taking us a while. We still have, literally, about 5 more inches to go. You just gotta give it some muscle. That's what I'm doing now, is giving a little muscle. Because it gets hard to roll out. I'm practically rolling off my table here. We're pretty much at 20, but now how are we at the 10? Oh, okay, we're at the 10. Great. So what we're gonna do is do one final fold, and that's how it's gonna sit overnight. So I'm gonna fold it into thirds, like we did before. And kind of maybe make this a little more. Okay, these are not perfect. You know, like again, I'm a home baker. My corners aren't all as nice and rectangular as I would like them, but it certainly is a nice laminated piece to go into the refrigerator and sit overnight.